This is something I hear a ton from my clients, and it makes a lot of sense. Of course, you want your book to sell well. You want people to read it. You want it to maybe be optioned. You want your book to do really well. But having a bestseller is not as simple as you may think. In fact, I don't know what people think makes a bestseller, but I dug into the research a little bit and wanted to let you know, sorry, mosquitoes. I wanted to let you know what it actually means to be a bestseller, because it does mean something very specific, and at some point it gets very complex. So it's good to know what you're going for. So a bestseller, of course, means a book that sells a lot of copies. And of course, we want our books to sell a lot of copies. But to get it on, hey, Devin, to get your book on a bestseller list, specifically something like the NYTimes or the Wall Street Journal, if you're writing a business book, the LA Times, USA Today, these are some of the publications that have bestseller lists that you might know. In order to do that, you have to sell a number of copies in a certain amount of time. So generally upwards of 5,000 copies in the first week. And that's quite a feat to do, to get a lot of people excited about your book, and so that 5,000 people buy it in 1 week within 7 days. To do that, you have to be connected to a lot of people, and so on and so forth. It's not a question of you publish a great book, and it is a great book, and suddenly everyone buys it and becomes a bestseller in that first week. You have to really prime the pump to get it ready to make you a bestseller that would be on the kinds of lists that you are used to hearing about, like #1 New York Times bestseller. That is the instant bestseller. That could be a bestseller if your book comes out in hardback first. That would be the kind of bestseller that I think a lot of us are thinking about when we think about bestsellers. But there are other ways to have a bestseller. For example, your book can come out in hardcover and sell okay, and maybe it doesn't reach any list, but it's popular with a lot of people. For example, I believe this happened with Eat, Pray, Love. It came out in hard copy. Elizabeth Gilbert did a lot of speaking and at bookstores and mosquitoes, and then it came out in paperback, and the paperback is really what made it a bestseller. That's when it became the book that women handed to their friends. It became this underground bestseller, and that's when it started to top the charts. It was not until 8, 9, 10, 12 months after it had actually come out. It was the slow build. And then it sold many copies and launched Elizabeth Gilbert into stardom and all of that. So that's another way that your book can sell super well and become a bestseller, but it may not appear on any kind of list. Now, there are people out there who are trying to, and have successfully, game the system. So there was an experiment done by a geophysicist and a complex system analyst in the early 90s to see if they could game the bestseller list system and shoot a book to bestseller status. And what they did, which is really considered unethical, and also it's really expensive, so I don't suggest doing it, but when this book came out, they strategically placed orders in many different bookstores around the country so that right after it published, there were all these registers. It was registered that the book had been purchased a number of times, like 5,000 times or something like that. And then it registered at number 8 on the New York Times bestseller list, and eventually it went up to number 1. When their scheme was discovered, it was then widely debated of how ethical it was to do that kind of thing, to buy your own book, and like I said, expensive. So if you want to game the system, you have to have pretty deep pockets. I also wanted to note that having an Amazon bestseller, it actually doesn't mean anything. Really, all that means is that you are really good at gaming the Amazon algorithm, and a bestseller on Amazon just means that it's number 1 on Amazon. It doesn't mean that people are buying it in stores, that's bookstores or big box stores or food stores or any other place where books are sold. It's only about Amazon sales, and when it's a bestseller on Amazon, it sometimes is because there are people behind it who have been able to game the algorithm. So you can see online sometimes people are like, make your book a #1 Amazon #1 bestseller. That's all it is about gaming, hacking the algorithm on Amazon, and about timing. What else did I want to tell you? We can really get into the weeds here, and of course there are lots of exceptions and hacks and workarounds, and when you dig deep into the data, it's like, well, the New York Times compiles their bestseller list this way, but the Washington Post does it this way, and LA Times does it that way. So that's why you can see some discrepancies between what is ranking at one place, let's say on an LA Times bestseller list, and what's ranking in another place on the USA Today bestseller list. That's what it is, because they're drawing their data from different places. There isn't one centralized hub that's tracking all the sales of your book, although there's been a lot of effort in the publishing world to do that. There's always things that get through and are not included in the system. Like, for example, audiobooks are not tracked. So what do we do about that? Because audiobooks are hugely popular. Ebooks are counted towards it, and so on and so on. There's all of these micro nuances to get into. But a lot of people want to have a bestseller, and I think that they don't necessarily understand what that means. So that's what this is for, is to help you understand. A bestseller, meaning you're on the list. On a list means selling 5,000 to 10,000 copies in the first week after publication. But you can still have a bestseller if your book takes off after that first week. You have to keep promoting it, keep appearing in podcasts and on shows and in places where people are going to buy it, and maybe there's an underground grassroots campaign that happens. Maybe you have a list and people buy through that. So or if there's a movie or a TV show that comes out because of your book, then it will reach bestseller status, but not right out of the gate, not first thing. And the really important thing to know is that these days, unless you're fortunate enough to ride some wave that comes right at the moment your book is publishing, like, for example, Me Too, or a very fractious election, or something that happens globally, and your book happens to be about that subject in some way, those kinds of things can happen, but you cannot account for them. They just are going to happen, or they're not going to happen. You can't control that. If you want to have more of a say in how your book sells, it's important to cultivate an audience, people who want to hear from you, who want to hear about your book, about the topic of your book, or just from you well before you start to have a book out there. And the final thing I want to say is that while it is, of course, something to aim for to have a bestseller, there are plenty of amazing books that are not bestsellers, and they're still very well respected and much needed. Some academic books, for example, that would be an easy thing to point to, is academic books are rarely bestsellers, but they are really important because they're people thinking about how things work or could work, or policy, what to do about things. And also very small experimental literary books, which are also really important for moving conversation forward, for advancing culturally and artistically. And these are rarely bestsellers too. So being a bestseller doesn't have to be your only criteria in having your book come out. And sometimes it's good to be clear with yourself about why you're writing this book. Are you doing it to say you have a bestseller? Is that really important to you or your business? Or is something else equally or even more important than being able to say that you are a #1 New York Times bestseller? So some food for thought. I'd love to hear what you think, what you're aiming for. Of course, like I said, this is a very complex topic and we could parse it in many ways, but this is just to get you going. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're aiming for. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them too. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon.